When booting up Starfield for the first time, I had two possibilities floating around in my head. One, this could end up just being Skyrim in space, or two, something closer to No Man's Sky. Well, after about 80 hours or so, I think I have an answer. Guhi couldn't make it today. She's in the hospital. Not because anything's physically wrong with her, she just really likes the smell of sick people.
What?
Now, if you've ever played an Elder Scrolls game like Morrowind, Oblivion, or even Skyrim, then you're well aware of the type of world building and storytelling Bethesda is capable of, putting tons of detail into every little spot to really flesh out each space and giving you that drive to want to explore. Too many times I've been in the middle of a mission just to end up finding something interesting that leads me down a 5-hour rabbit hole of side quests, and I see that as a sign of a good game. You want the side stuff to not just feel like filler, and I think they did a decent job on that front. Now, a bit of a side quest spoiler here, so go ahead and fast forward a smidge. You don't want to hear a side quest spoiler, but I remember at one point I was in Neon City for reasons that I don't actually remember, and ended up joining a gang, starting and ending a war, and just to have that gang that I joined get recruited into the city guards after we had won. Even the simpler things like walking into the club, pickpocketing some random dude and stealing his penthouse keycard and proceeding to rob the place. It's moments like those where I had the most fun. Very early on in the game, I think I was around level 20 or so and decided, screw it, I'm gonna head to the highest level planet I can find just to see what happens. I ended up on some level 75 planet, clearing out a huge facility that took about an hour or so. And later on in the main story, I found myself back at that same facility. The amount of freedom you have just to do whatever you want and go wherever is a huge selling point for someone like me, and that bleeds into the dialogue options as well. You can completely change the outcome of events by persuading people or bribing them, but don't expect Baldur's Gate levels of options here. When doing this, your choices are very binary. It's either you managed to succeed or you didn't. Now, some of the missions, like the stuff you get from the mission boards, tend to be your simple go here and kill some dude types of quests. They had their uses when I was trying to finish out skill requirements, but beyond that, I wasn't a huge fan of those. When it comes to the main story, I have some mixed feelings as well, and I'm going to try to explain this in a spoiler-free way to the best of my abilities. The very early story stuff I thought was pretty decent. It was interesting enough to keep me wondering what's next, but the middle stuff was pretty meh and just felt a lot like filler. The end of the main story is where it all comes together, and I very much enjoyed some of the choices you get to make that affect how things play out at the end. Overall, the story, even with the middle being a little underwhelming, was solid and leads you into New Game Plus in a way that actually makes sense. The last thing I feel I need to mention about the main story is if you skip all the side stuff and only focus on the campaign, which I do not recommend, you might find it to be a little short. In a game with over 1,000 planets, you would be missing out on so much content and skipping side stuff and not exploring. While I'm already talking about exploration, I do have some complaints. You might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of content if there's that many planets, but I feel like it's a little misleading. It is true you have a lot of content, but the game restricts where you can actually go. When you drop into a planet, the game spawns in some random points of interest for you to check out. Within a pretty decent sized zone, you could think of each zone like a tile surrounded by a wall. If you reach that wall or explore all the points of interest, well, you have to take off and land again to spawn in a new randomly generated tile. These tend to be very copy-paste. It might be a small settlement or a tiny building with a few baddies in it, but nothing all that interesting. Now, the places that aren't randomly generated are pretty cool and definitely worth checking out. These tend to be much bigger, fleshed out areas for you to explore, like labs or research stations, among many other things. Some planets might have a few of these static places, while others won't have any. And I guess it would be a little unrealistic to expect that many planets to have fully fleshed out static areas to explore, so I do see the reason to add the randomly generated stuff. I just wish they were a bit more inspired. Each planet also has weather and its own list of resources you can gather. Some are more Earth-like, while others are frozen or scorched hellscapes. These resources are important if you're one of those people who like crafting or base building, and gives you a reason to invest into those skills. The base building is decent enough, but don't expect the level of artistic freedom you have in other games like Valheim. It's mostly pre-made structures you'll plop down and link together, but have plenty of functional and aesthetic options to fill that space. Crafting is where you can get a little crazy if you want to. You have the ability to set up massive automated farms on multiple planets, while also being able to link these together to make absolute abominations like this one. And that's nothing compared to the absurd stuff that other people have done, but it's a decent example of what you can do. Now, you can use these resources in a few different ways. One is making mods for your weapons, giving you some freedom to kind of adapt each weapon to your playstyle, but that also takes a bit of investment into the appropriate skill, otherwise your options are pretty limited. Same thing goes for armor mods mods. I did my first playthrough without investing into any of these skills or setting up any farms and had no issues at all, playing on hard for most of the time with the occasional jump to very hard. So don't see crafting as a requirement, as you will likely find everything you need playing the game normally. Another option is cash. It takes some setup, but you can easily make an automated farm and just sell everything you produce if that's more your thing. Or option 3 also involves setting up an automated farm, but you instead use those resources to craft tie-in components in stacks of 99, get just ludicrous amounts of XP. The setup for this takes a while, but if you just want to max out all your skills, this is probably the fastest way to do that. As far as skills go, you have 82 to choose from, each with 4 ranks. They range from the more generic % increased damage to each weapon type to adding different ways to play the game, like going super stealthy, opting for a more tanky approach. I ended up going full stealth and had an absolute blast. If you like being a space pirate, well, you can do that also. I'm not going to go over all the skills because that's kind of a whole video by itself, but there's plenty of options to fit your playstyle. There are more gameplay affecting things you get from doing the main story, but you're going to have to experience that one for yourself. One thing they absolutely had to get right in this game was the gunplay. You will spend a significant amount of your time shooting, and if your guns all felt like butthole, then you're probably not going to have a good time, but I'm happy to say they did a decent job in that department. It's not Destiny 2, but it still feels pretty good. Each weapon feels unique and has their own sound as well. You have all the weapons you would expect, from pistols, shotguns, machine guns, rifles, and melee stuff, among other things. So you have everything you need to become the murder hobo you've always wanted to be. Now, if you're a loot goblin like myself, then you're going to run into some storage issues very quickly. That's easily solved if you build a little outpost with some storage boxes. Ship combat was a bit of a pain point for me. I think this was mostly a self-inflicted wound, so I'm only going to briefly touch on this subject. I made the mistake of not investing into ship combat at all and couldn't use class B or C parts. So anytime I would have to fight like 3 or more ships by myself, it was pretty much instant death. I wish you had some more baseline options to make some of these fights a little bit easier to navigate, because getting murked in only a couple seconds doesn't feel very good, but you know, lessons learned. Invest in your ship. Other than that, the ships feel pretty good to use and handle in a way that makes sense. You can also fully customize them to fit your needs, from a place to store all your precious loot to an area with all your crafting benches or just a place with a bed for you to pass the time. Think of your ship as one big Lego set for you to mix and match parts and build whatever you want, assuming you invested in those skills. Otherwise, your options are pretty limited. The final thing I want to touch on is bugs. This wouldn't be a Bethesda game without some buggy AI, and it has plenty of that. I think the NPCs are a little broken in this game. At no point did any of these encounters with bugs impact the game in a serious way, so I really didn't mind it. Most, if not all of them, are pretty hilarious. The only bug that actually impacted gameplay for me was when my quest giver decided he was going to teleport into the mountains, and I had no idea where I was supposed to go. I probably spent like 20 minutes following him slowly back to base. If this guy is going to walk all the way back to the city, I think it'll actually take like an hour for him to get there at this pace. So I just went and rested, and then he reappeared where he was supposed to be. Problem solved. So yeah, the game's not perfect. It's got the occasional bug, and sometimes the animations can be a little annoying. If you ever try to get a quick melee sneak attack off and run away, well, you'll know what I'm talking about. But otherwise, it's a great game. So to answer my question, is this Skyrim in space or No Man's Sky clone? No, it's something new. I would rate this game at a solid 8.5 out of 10. And if you've got Game Pass, I mean, nothing to lose. Worth a try.